While Ralph was busy with GDC in San Francisco, I was actually lucky enough to catch some early blooms of the cherry blossoms in Japan. So that's a nice little bucket list item checked off. The reason I was there was because I was invited by Sony to get some early hands-on time with Saros ahead of its full release next month. And yeah man, as far as first impressions go, this made a damn good one. I'll begin by clarifying my preview conditions. I was invited by Sony to visit their headquarters in Tokyo to play a near final build of the game on a base PS5. They offered to cover flights and accommodation, but as always we declined and covered our own costs to guarantee you truly independent coverage. There I played roughly the first 3 hours of the game up to the end of the second biome, of which the full game will have 6, and I was allowed to capture gameplay for all of it aside from the tutorial. So yeah, what you're seeing here is my own gameplay. Now, in case you haven't been keeping up with this, Saros is the next game from House Mark, the studio behind Returnal. I think that's a good starting point for this video because upon watching this gameplay, you might think, wait, isn't this Returnal again? And you'd be half right. In fact, in Sony's presentation, they outright said that Saros is meant to be a spiritual successor to Returnal, and after playing it, I can confirm that that is indeed the case. Saros is another sci-fi third-person shooter roguelite set on an alien planet featuring the ruins of an ancient civilization. It's got that same gorgeous high production value that's a rarity in the roguelite genre. It's got that top-class spatial audio and haptic feedback that showcases the PS5 in a way that few games have since Returnal, and all that weaves into its tight, three-dimensional bullet hell gameplay that both feels, looks, and sounds incredible. So yeah, I think if you enjoyed Returnal, Saros is going to be an easy pickup, as it's already clear from my brief hands-on time that it carries forward much of what people loved about that game. Now me personally, I put myself in the camp of people who wanted to love Returnal, but just couldn't stick with it owing to how demanding it was. And I don't just mean like the physical demands, but even just the mental demand of committing myself to a new run, since Returnal had a distinct lack of mechanics that would make runs tangibly easier or faster over time. That's not inherently a bad thing, of course. I get the appeal of progression through pure gameplay skill and game knowledge rather than overt mechanics, but it's certainly a bit of a roadblock for people with limited time or those who like to bounce between multiple games, since you just can't get those reps in or retain the muscle memory required to push through. The good news is that many of the ways that Saros builds on the foundations of Returnal act in direct response to those pain points. Where Returnal asks you to meet it on its own terms, Saros is all about player agency, with things like meta progression to make runs easier over time, being able to begin runs from the furthest biome you've unlocked, modifiers that let you tune the difficulty, a shield mechanic that lets you play more aggressively if you choose, and much more. But importantly, all these things have been carefully balanced with trade-offs to ensure that the experience isn't completely trivialized. I'm not totally sold on all of its corrections, and notably its approach to storytelling is much more forward than that of its predecessor in a way that isn't doing it any favors at the moment, I think. But overall, I had an absolute blast with this, for all the same reasons that I enjoyed my time with Returnal, but with the added freedom of choice here, making the challenge feel just that bit more surmountable. Now, the story setup for Saros has a little more upfront clarity than that of Returnal. You play as Arjun, a soldier sent as part of the 4th expedition to a faraway planet to colonize it and harvest its resources for Earth. Only he hides a more personal motive. He's looking for someone dear to him who was sent in one of those prior expeditions, never to be heard from since. He's also not alone. Unlike Returnal, Saros' protagonist has a full crew with him, a mix of jarheads, engineers, and scientists who have set up shop in a sort of hub area known as the Passage, which is where Arjun rematerializes every time he dies. So between the immediate who and why of Arjun and a surrounding cast filling in his knowledge gaps, the game's certainly a fair bit more overt in its storytelling, and I do get why Housemarque has gone in this direction, and that it probably helps to push people through those early hours. Will that pay off? Maybe, but it is the one thing about Saros that I'm a little unsure of at the moment. Returnal was quite thrifty in its storytelling, piecing it out in text logs, dream sequences, strange anomalies, and all witnessed through the singular, fragmented perspective of Selene. While I didn't finish her story, I certainly found this approach made for a level of intrigue that didn't feel quite as strong here in the early hours of Saros, since so much is surfaced so quickly. I expected that intrigue to instead be found within the surrounding characters then, but in my limited time with them, they weren't doing much for me, to be honest. The corporation had that sort of tropey, spare no expense attitude, and Arjun's crew were similarly kind of one note, lacking distinct motives or personalities to latch onto. There's certainly glimpses of some interesting conflicts between them though, like that of Arjun's recklessness constantly putting him and his team's safety at risk, and I'm hopeful that sort of stuff will continue to escalate further into the game. But yeah, at least in these early hours, these characters weren't leaving much of an impression.
I've uploaded my scans of the architecture. Build-out drones will take care of the rest.
Good work, Kayla, but we still have plenty to do. Get stacked to help you with the cargo crates.
That's not to say there aren't any lingering mysteries here though. The disappearance of the previous colonies and the eclipse that causes all kinds of weird stuff to happen on this planet, which we'll talk more about later, are compelling enough hooks that I'm keen to see where it all goes. I also find myself drawn to Arjun as a character, mostly thanks to the excellent performance from Rahul Kohli of Midnight Mass fame. I'm unfortunately not allowed to show many of the cinematic cutscenes that really kind of show off his range, but there were moments where Kohli's convincing performance really sold me on Arjun's frustration, his rage, his sadness, of course all propped up by the game's high fidelity performance capture and character detail. And I guess that's a good segue to touch on Saros' presentation, which I think does manage to meet and even surpass that of Returnal. It's got that same high detail, AAA quality look that's rare to find in the roguelike genre, which is, you know, dominated by indies that don't have that kind of budget, though I think Housemarque have really doubled down on delivering a sense of scale here with Saros. You can see the first biome here has this enormous stark white citadel looming in the distance, and the idea that you'll at some point find out what exists inside it provides a very tantalizing motive. The second biome, on the other hand, took me underground into the inner workings of a factory built by an ancient race, and navigating through this winding space before seamlessly being spat back out to the surface made me feel as if I was a little microbe exploring the veins and organs of some impossibly huge living machine. So yeah, all that stuff is great, but for many, gameplay is king. And Housemarque agrees, as they themselves reiterated that this has always been a core pillar of their games, and Saros once again demonstrates how that ethos pays off big time. The actual gameplay of Saros is quite interesting because this is the part that I expected to be most similar to Returnal when I watched prior gameplay. And yeah, there are obviously many familiar elements here, but I think Saros is also doing just enough to mix up the formula. Let's start with what's the same. Saros is a third-person shooter roguelite that adopts a sort of arcadey auto-aim to let you focus on dodging bullet hell projectiles coming from enemies. Also, like Returnal, this is a game that you don't just play through sight, but also sound and touch, as it makes full use of the PS5's features. Its third-person perspective isn't favorable for a bullet hell style game like this, but the spatial audio tech here gives you a sort of spider sense, allowing you to easily pinpoint the location of enemies and their projectiles outside your view. While the DualSense haptics add a great deal to game feel and even weapon identity, since each of them feel so different in your hands owing to their vibrations and how they utilize the triggers, particularly when using their alt fire modes activated by a half pull of the left trigger. Now my favorite weapon during the demo was this hand cannon whose alt fire let me fire as fast as I could pull the trigger, and you might think, well, why wouldn't I always use that? But the thing is, using it would like jam up the trigger, making it kind of strenuous to do all the time. Of course, if you don't like that, you can turn down this stuff in the settings, but I think using physical strain as an added lever for balance is really novel and further strengthens that kinesthetic link between you and your weapons. Speaking of weapons, the loot feels quite similar too, in that guns can roll with perks that make them a little more interesting, and as you increase your proficiency level during runs through various means like killing things, those weapons will drop with more perks, up to a maximum of 5. These are a mix of universal perks like bullets that can penetrate or ricochet, or fire extra projectiles, or projectiles that home in. There are also weapon-specific perks that meaningfully change how they function, like this one that greatly increased weak point damage at the cost of disabling the auto aim. Switch that gun out pretty quick though, because oh man, playing this game without the auto aim with so much to keep track of, I just don't think I'm built for that. Where things begin to deviate a little is in the way that the stats of these weapons scale with your character stats. So you can see here that this hand cannon's weak point damage increases with that green stat, which is max health. So how do you increase that? Well, you can do it during runs via leveling up your proficiency and through other collectible upgrades, but most importantly, the floor of it can be increased outside your runs via this skill tree. This is the meta progression system of Saros. The currency you collect on runs doesn't just increase your proficiency, but is also used here to unlock various gameplay defining capstone perks, like for example an adrenaline meter that increases my damage the longer I don't get hit. Its other main purpose though is letting you select permanent increases to your 3 core stats, which are basically health, shields, and power. It seemed a bit lame at first. Like, I typically don't care much for flat increases in games since they rarely actually change how you play, but here they do, since these stats being linked to the weapon stats essentially lets you specialize in certain weapons and playstyles. What also changes things up a surprising amount is the addition of a block button on the left bumper. You might think, okay, big whoop, but in practice this actually adds a great deal to the flow of combat, since absorbing projectiles with it is how you charge up your power weapon, which are super strong. So, alongside keeping an eye out for projectiles to dodge, you're also looking for every chance to eat them up like a famished Pac-Man, then unleashing that power ASAP so you can start building toward the next shot of your power weapon. I'm really into this. The hyper-aggressive playstyle fits quite nicely with Arjun's character, and it builds on Returnal's already very solid combat foundations with an added layer of interactivity, and also adds to the spectacle, since it just looks sick as hell to repeatedly soak up these mesmerizing displays of projectiles and fire back with your own. So there's that moment-to-moment risk versus reward equation and how you want to use that shield and when. But what's especially cool about Saros is in all the other ways it doubles down on that kind of decision making at a structural level. It begins with the big thing on the box art and where the game derives its name from, the eclipse. During Arjun's runs, he encounters a strange device that brings about an eclipse which warps the planet's environment and its inhabitants. This has interesting narrative implications in that the true purpose of the eclipse is one of Saros' central mysteries, and each time it happens, one of Arjun's team members goes a little more cuckoo.
I have seen it, heard it, like a dream far beyond these walls.
Importantly though, the eclipse also has an impact on gameplay, in that it makes enemies in that biome more dangerous, bumping up their aggression and having them spit out new projectiles that cannot be blocked and will reduce your max health. Though this can be cleansed through usage of your power weapon, so seeking out projectiles you can block becomes all the more valuable. The benefit though is that the eclipse increases the yield of currency, allowing you to gain power faster both within and outside your runs. To unlock the final boss of a biome, I was forced to push further into the level with this on, but after that, it became a sort of optional thing. Every time I reached the end of the biome thereafter, I'd still have to activate the eclipse to move forward, but I could then choose to take on the boss immediately, or explore a bit more first to level up, keeping in mind that the eclipse has bumped up the challenge. And I think that's all rather clever design. If you're having a bad run, it gives you that extra chance to get some last minute power gains, but the added danger demands a little more consideration, since otherwise it'd be a no-brainer to clear everything in the biome before hitting the boss. Same can be said of the game's modifiers. Toward the end of the demo, I unlocked the ability to tailor my runs with modifiers to make things easier and some to make them harder, but these need to be balanced out before you can start the run. So you aren't just straight up eliminating the challenge of the game in a way that traditional difficulty settings do. You're just shifting the difficulty to other elements that might be easier for you to stomach. This isn't a new thing for roguelites, I've seen it in Hades and a bunch of others, but it's typically the sort of thing that comes online only after your first full completion, so it's cool to see it unlocked earlier for those who might need that leg up before then. Finally, an awesome new feature that Saros brings to the roguelite formula is that you can begin your runs directly from the latest biome you unlock. You don't have to restart from the beginning every time. One of Housemarque's goals stated in the pre-briefing was to make play sessions shorter, cutting the average run to about 15 to 20 minutes or so, and they've definitely succeeded in that, as this fast travel system ensures that runs no longer get exponentially longer the further you get into the game. They'll always roughly be 15 to 20 minutes should you choose. But as with many additions made in Saros, Housemarque have considered trade-offs to reward those who take the hard road. Jumping straight into a later biome means you won't have leveled up or have any upgrades, so it's going to be more difficult than if you had started an earlier biome first. I've also been assured that, once you've unlocked all the biomes, if you wanted to just do a run through the entire thing in one go, you can absolutely do that. All these systems funnel into my main takeaway with Saros. This is a roguelite that wants to give you a high degree of choice, and not in the way of nudging the RNG in your favor to game the system, but offering tangible binary choices while still retaining much of what makes this genre so addicting. Accessibility has been something of a hot button topic in recent years. My stance is that accessibility options are always a net positive, but blanket difficulty modes or setting sliders are boring. Ideally, they should be an avenue for interesting design, thoughtfully curated on a per game basis, rewarding those who want to reach higher while propping up those who need a hand without diminishing the challenge that drives the game's best moments. And that's exactly what Saros seems to be doing. How aggressively you want to play, how demanding you want the combat to be, how long you want to spend in a run, what weapons or elements of weapons you'd like to lean into, all of this stuff is up to you, but not without you giving up something else, which means that no matter who you are or how you like to play, you're going to be encouraged to get the most out of Saros. I can't say much for its narrative chops yet, a jury is still out on that one, but in all other ways, it's clear to me that Saros is bringing forward much of what made Returnal so great, while adding features that make it more attractive to people like me who bounced off Returnal. For that reason, I had a ton of fun with my brief time with it, and I can absolutely see myself sticking through to the end in the full release, which drops next month on April 30th. Expect a review from us sometime around then. For now, I'm gonna go take another stab at Returnal, because apparently I was the only one to beat the final boss in my Saros preview session, so I'm feeling a little ballsy. Anyway, thank you for watching, catch you in the next one.